even if it's just chemical reactions and neurons firing and things happening, it's really interesting nevertheless, because I think it tells us a lot about ourselves.
Does that speak to the soul having sensory perception of its own?
It could be something like the Matrix, where there is no reality. Like all of this is imagined in some way.
Being an atheist, I have actually seen Jesus.
I'm going to try to stay far enough away that he doesn't, you know.
So, like, Barney doesn't talk about what happens when you die. That,
Sure.
that's a little morose for that type of show.
All right. Welcome. Welcome to yet another kitchen sink microscopy. I'm Eric Rosenblatt, and we would love it. Floyd would love it if you all would like and share this video and subscribe to the channel. And that's what cool cats do. And you want to be a cool cat, right? What's going on?
Meow. I'm Casey Rochford, and I am not a cat, but I am cool. And we would love it if you'd check out our music too, because we're on iTunes and Spotify, and of course patreon.com/ksmvidcast is the quickest way to get brand new songs. But I digress. What should we discuss tonight?
Well, there's a whole slew of things that we've occasionally. Why don't we talk about cats? That's what Floyd wants us to talk about. Cats and cheese and fish and chasing birds. So why don't we dive right into it? No, I think we've had a bunch of topics kind of on the back burner for a while, and I think it'd be good to do something, one of those interesting, weird topics that doesn't really fit into any particular category. So why don't we talk about near-death experiences?
Yeah, I I think that's a really interesting topic, especially when you look at it from like a secular angle. Uh, because when people say, "Oh, I was close to death and I saw things or whatever," I mean, you can't really say like, "No, that didn't happen," but doesn't mean there's not like a scientific explanation for it.
Yeah, that's true, for sure. And there are actually some medical professionals and scientists kind of investigating this, and they have been for a very long time. But of course, it kind of falls into that category of woo. So it doesn't research into it doesn't necessarily get a lot of funding because it's not really taken totally seriously by the mainstream scientific community. But there are definitely scientists investigating it, and they take it pretty seriously.
Uh-huh. What are
Especially
they?
medical professionals, because they've heard a lot of stories from people and
Mhm.
have become interested. And in fact, some medical professionals, surgeons, doctors, or whatever, they've had the same experiences themselves and been moved by it and went on to dedicate their lives to investigating it and understanding it, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Do you know what they're researching per se? Is it more of like an intangible experiment thing where they basically just see whether or not people that are brought back from the brink had experienced something, or are they actually um, like putting people into a functional MRI as they're about to go, that way, whether or not they actually live or come back from it, you can see brain activity and what parts of the brain might be lighting up, and you know
Ye- uh, all of the above.
no,
I mean, I don't know that all of those experiments have been conducted. Certainly, a lot of interviews. There, in fact, was this. I can't remember the name of the program, but there was this little project that set about in various countries to um, excuse me, interview patients after they've undergone surgery or been in a coma or something like that, and ask questions and try to collect information. And obviously, that's difficult. So, as far as I know, they haven't collected quite enough data. But what you're talking about with the MRI or various other analytical systems have been proposed. So maybe they'll do it. I mean, I
I
don't know
mean,
how many
I
people would like
want
as
to
they're
die in
about
an
to.
MRI tube.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like
Like,
the worst place.
yeah,
But I
all
would do it for
noisy and
science.
cramped. Yeah,
I
I mean,
like totally. I
I
would totally do that.
yeah,
Like,
I mean, if I wasn't already going to, I have plans to die while having sex. If I wasn't doing that already, I would totally be like, yeah, I'll die in the functional MRI for science. But
oh wait, no, what?
unfortunately,
Wait.
I'm booked. Sorry.
Don't restrict yourself to one thing or another. Hey, you gotta be open minded here. Why not die while having sex inside an MRI?
Well, that's kind of hard to do because you're not supposed to move. I mean, I could be a dead fish or something, but that's no fun.
Well, that's true. I mean, I guess, but I mean, what a way to go.
Wait, what topic are we on again?
uh, I can't remember. But,
No, but I talk about this a little bit in my book, Beating the Odds Without Any Gods. When we come close to the end of life, the way I think it happens is a lot like when you're about to fall asleep, and whatever you're thinking of, really hard. Like if you're trying to solve a problem, you're probably going to dream about possible solutions to the problem, or how much the problem's plaguing you, or and they tend to be like allegorical or metaphorical. Like there's imagery that means one thing and could mean another, and you just don't know. It's all very abstract. What if that's just what's happening effectively in the last moments of your life, when your neurons are all firing like crazy? Whatever you're thinking of, like, okay, I'm dying, I'm going to go to heaven, or I'm dying and I really was an asshole, I'm probably going to go to hell. Because near-death experiences have gone both ways. There's people who saw fiery pits, and there's people who saw white lights and stuff. So
yeah, and certainly, I think people that there's a bias towards collecting data that I think a lot of people want the positive side of things, but there is a negative side. I think it constitutes like a quarter of the stories have some kind of terror aspect to them. But and yeah, there's a lot of people who think scientific people in the scientific community that say it's basically just a brain dump, right? Like something weird is happening to your body and your brain's trying to figure it out. And so that's where all these like flashbacks and weird things with family members and stuff come from, because it's just like throwing a bunch of stuff at you. But two things that kind of make me wonder about it. One is the fact that people who have these experiences tend to say they weren't really like, they weren't a dream-like experience or a vision, but it was like hyper reality, like more real than real, like super vibrant. And maybe you could explain that with the idea that, well, it's some kind of last big hurrah from your brain or something, and so it's going to give you its all. I guess you could say that, but it does raise a few questions, as well as the fact that so many of the stories, the experiences that people have had, follow a similar narrative and feel. Like even across the world, like across different cultures and things, we've had documented stories of this for centuries, at millennia actually, um, and they all kind of follow like this hero's journey sort of thing, um, and which is interesting in and of itself. I, I, to me, I think like even if it's just chemical reactions and neurons firing and things happening, it's really interesting nevertheless, because I think it tells us a lot about ourselves, and it's worth studying. Like probably, in fact, I would argue that it's probably the most worthwhile thing to study if you're interested in the human condition and our place in the world. Um, and what life means, what consciousness means, that kind of thing. Like I think it's very, very valuable. It's sort of like the deepest reaches of our mind or soul, if you're spiritually inclined, you know.
Yeah. So yeah, that's something else that I wonder is like, to give it the benefit of the doubt. Let's say that there is an afterlife, and this is you like breaching it for however long. Some people have reported that they've spent several minutes or even longer, I think, in whatever this realm is supposedly. Um, you know, again, going back to the dream thing, time gets distorted when you're dreaming, but for the benefit of the doubt, let's say this was real afterlife stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Does that speak to the soul having sensory perception of its own?
Hmm.
Like if you're seeing these things and experiencing this hyper reality and stuff, uh, but you don't have a corporeal nose or eyes or ears, uh, like how
Well,
does that work? Like what is the experience actually like? Is
that's
it just in your mind, or does the soul have its own mind? It's like like that little brain dude in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It was in a bigger thing. Like,
yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I don't know that it could really be answered because we can't. Well, some scientific people have argued that this is the one metaphysical, like spiritual thing that could actually possibly be scientifically studied, like properly studied.
mhm.
Um, but like I okay, I guess it depends on like what you think that place is. If it's another dimension or parallel world or something like that, if it's some kind of fourth dimensional thing, like I kind of tend to lean that way a little bit, like maybe that's possible. And so us here, we're like basically, let's say there's a fourth dimensional being who our three-dimensional existence is just sort of a um, representation of the tip of that fourth dimensional being. So it could, in theory, have the ability to see things or hear things or interact with things. Um, so, I, I mean, I guess if you think about it from a multidimensional universe aspect, then that would maybe make sense. You'd have like hyper eyes or something like that, and or maybe it's possible it could be something like the Matrix, um, where there is no reality. Like all of this is imagined in some way, and what we see when we die is just yet another um, like it's just seeing more of the Matrix or going to a different place within it or something like that. I don't like to use the term the Matrix because I think that there's older tales that tell better stories than that, but that's what people understand.
Yeah.
So the
I
average person will understand that.
I don't know about like a shared imaginative experience. I don't really know if that would, I mean, not that it's 100% shared. We all have our own individual perceptions of things and whatnot, but um, through communication, we can get glimpses of those interpretations. And if, for the most part, they tend to jive with what we call reality.
Yeah,
So I don't know that it's like a concoction, unless the concoction were extraordinarily complex, which borders on the nigh impossible
yeah,
range. But I don't know. I still feel like I'm in the camp where there's just some kind of brain related explanation. Like if there was a functional MRI done on somebody toward the end of their life, like particularly I'd want to look at religious versus non-religious people because of the whole temporal lobe epilepsy thing that I think we've talked about once or twice,
mm-hmm.
where they've found possible links to what they call a God spot in the temporal lobe, where people with TLE have religious hallucinations, and hallucinations can be very convincing, very real.
It's true. Yeah, not that I
And I,
know anything about that.
yeah, I mean, I being an atheist, I have actually seen Jesus when I was in maybe the fourth grade. Um,
Wow.
I was on the way to the library with my mom. I let her drive because I was in the fourth grade. So I was in the passenger seat, and we're driving on that road past Lamont at the time. Now it's like an LA Fitness or something. That
Mhm.
back road that goes back toward Swayze or whatever that library is.
Oh
And
yeah, it parallels Highway 16. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So it was like not a lot of lights and stuff. It was pretty dark. And then like floating above us, like above and to the front of us was a throne with Jesus, like looking at us and smiling, and he stayed like equidistant to the front of the car, so he was like moving backwards. Um,
Huh.
and I said to my mom, I just saw Jesus, and she like freaked out. She pulled over, started crying. She was all happy, and
Wow.
I was like, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
you know uh,
What did Jesus look like?
well, that's the thing. It looked like your quintessential drawing of a white guy with long straight brown hair and a well coiffed beard, like
Yeah. Okay. Now, I will have to kind of deviate into Star Trek V, which I think is actually not a bad movie, by the way. Like, I actually kind of like that movie. Um, the idea that God would take a form that you understand makes a lot of sense. Um, so
yeah.
even though in the movie God was a dickhead alien bastard, um, but but the concept makes sense, right? Like you wouldn't imagine
Or
if
Q.
there, let's say there was a God, right? And I was like, what does God need with a starship? Uh, my favorite line in that movie. Um, but so let's say there was a God, and this God showed itself to you, right? But it looked like Cthulhu or something completely terrifying or alien or foreign. Would that would not be the right way to do it? You'd want God would want to look similar to you to relate, so you have something to relate to. Like if God is an alien and God exists on a silicon based planet and he's all like crystalline and stuff, well, and is all powerful, why not show up to the human beings as someone that looks like you?
Hmm.
um Now, some could say that's a bit deceptive.
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, but if you're trying to relate, convey a message or something, when in Rome, do as the Romans do, basically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I guess that kind of leaves it sort of open at that point.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been interesting if I were born like 10 years later. Like maybe it would have looked like the god from South Park, that little like pig looking thing that was like 2 feet tall or whatever. And like, who
Yeah,
knows?
well, they made a good point with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so as far as like, I think what you were getting at is the whole like social conditioning kind of thing, like societal conditioning. You have an expectation of something, therefore when something profoundly spiritual happens, your brain just injects whatever you think it should be.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, near death experiences, during the course of some of these interviews and stuff, they interviewed children, like little kids, and they had some of the very same kinds of experiences. So that kind of rules out, I mean, not entirely, but it does diminish the idea that all of those experiences are just something that are built on expectations.
Well,
um
I don't know if I agree with that, because if you're a kid that's old enough to answer questions in an interview, more than likely your parents have already begun indoctrinating you into their religion. So you've already got this idea. Like if you're 3 years old, you know what heaven is to
well,
you. You know?
but here, that's a good point. But as far as I know, religion was accounted for. It's like, okay, I get it if there's someone who's like 5 years old and they had a near death experience and their whole family is deeply religious. Well, but if the I, I'm pretty sure there's also people who didn't have that kind of influence as well. Plus,
It doesn't have to be their family. Like, say you decide, I'm not going to tell my kid about Santa Claus. They're going to find out about Santa Claus,
well,
just like they're going to find out about Jesus, because it's so
that
prevalent.
that's true. But if if the brain is taking the most significant thing to you, why would it choose something that is insignificant to you to display at your last moments? And why would it be the same common thing?
Well, it may seem insignificant, but if you're 3 years old and your world is small, but in that small world, you know, let's say a majority, like, because this statistically here in America is probably the case anywhere, the majority of people that are in your small world are probably from a Christian upbringing, and the afterlife is probably not something that you've given deep thought to, because your brain's not done developing. Your complicated world views and philosophies have not even begun to bud yet. So your um, though you may not have given it much thought, um, when something as horrible as death is upon you, uh, you'll probably go to that idea, I would think.
maybe, but well, for little kids, nobody. I mean, I was a little kid in the same kind of situation, and people like Jesus really didn't matter to me until I was a lot older. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't their brains go to something really significant to them, like Barney? Why isn't the afterlife? You move to the light, and then Barney comes and starts singing to you, or something. Some kind of like significant force in your life. Why is it kind of the same sort of narrative across all peoples and cultures? It is a little weird, and not saying it's
I
Jesus
think
or
it's
God. I'm
relevant
just,
though.
huh?
I think it's relevance though. Like Barney doesn't talk about what happens when you die. That
Sure.
that's a little morose for that type of show,
Well,
right?
it is Paul Rubens. So you never know. Um, hey kids, let's talk about death. You
it's
never
it's
know,
not
man.
it's not actually Paul Rubens.
Huh?
It's not actually Paul Rubens.
Isn't it Bernie?
No, that was a conspiracy theory I made up. I was like, Pee-wee disappeared about the same time as Barney showed up on the scene. You know, like I was just fucking around.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, it's not Pee-wee.
Oh, okay. Well, either way, that would be an excellent. I'm sure that Barney would probably talk about that. Mm. So, what do you think? Let's see. Man, there's so many. I think there's kind of a lot of stuff to talk about here. How about? Well, okay. the the fact that a lot of these kinds of experiences, going back into like connecting things with other things, um, a lot of these experiences sound very similar to the same experiences that people have when taking certain hallucinogens, like let's say LSD or dissociative drugs, in particular. Not that I've ever done that, but if I did, um, there could be like geometric landscapes and fantastical scenery and alien beings that give you certain super important information, um, like arcane knowledge and stuff like that. There's a sense of being one with the universe, complete disconnection with the physical body, which I want to talk about out of body experiences too, because they're kind of connected. Um, so what do you think about that sort of similarity?
So like hallucinogenic drugs and things like that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hallucinogens, dissociatives, things like that. Because I think, what if it's triggering the same mechanism that is triggered during those kinds of scenarios, whether it be some sort of um, like just a function of your brain, maybe it's just the circuitry, the way we're wired, it just does that, or um, it uh, maybe there's some otherworldly link there that's touched by both death and uh, hardcore hallucination.
I think that's pretty plausible because it's I mean there are similarities. I've never tried any kind of major hallucinogen beyond marijuana. Um, and from what I hear from other people's experiences is that there are certain drugs that make them feel like an interconnectedness with the fabric of time or the universe or other people or whatever. Um, uh, even mushrooms to some degree, I think, are capable
Yeah,
of doing that.
to a large degree.
So I think I think there's something to be said for like those types of drugs being able to kind of unlock that particular function in your brain that is muted for probably a pretty good reason. Because if, like, how well would you function if that were your everyday 24/7 experience, you know? Um,
Yeah.
like, it's like, I mean, we only see so many colors because of the number of rods and cones in our eye or whatever. But if all of a sudden we had the eyes of a bumblebee or something, we'd probably be pretty freaked out and distracted and unable to really function, probably uh, for quite a long time, you know, because you're so used to the way things were, right? So
Mhm.
I think that's why it's when people take those drugs, like they might feel that interconnectedness, but they definitely can't function. Um, you're left with that same lack of function when you're near death, you know. So it stands to reason that maybe the brain is opening up those channels. Well, especially when neurons are just firing out of control, right? So
Yeah.
um,
Well, I guess the
I think the same things that get triggered when you take a hallucinogenic drug easily be triggered by coming close to death.
well, sure, but why? What function does that serve?
Well, I don't know that it's a function that's done on purpose. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's the random firings, and that's probably why the randomness there. Probably why this doesn't happen with every person. Not every person that comes back from the brink of death says they saw something. A lot of people are like, I saw nothing. You know, it
Well,
just
but
went
then there's
black. You
people
know,
there's people who don't remember their dreams too, so maybe there's a memory component there as well, possibly.
right? Yeah. Um, you tend to remember dramatic dreams though, like really intense stuff, at least right after you wake up. So if you just got brought back from death and the doctor's like, you were dead for 2 minutes or whatever, you'd probably be like, I couldn't have been because I had this experience or whatever, you know. I think most people would probably recall that at least right off the bat, you know.
Yeah, well, and one thing that's interesting about this, like hallucination experiences, to some extent, do affect people. Like people remember them and they change you, um, but not like deeply. Dreams, pretty similar, but near death experiences tend to like profoundly alter the person, like at the core, um, because of how significant the experience is to them, how
Right.
vivid it is, that kind of thing. And so I don't. I mean, I think there's some kind of link there, but I
Well,
think they're different.
it's a bookmark moment. It's switching chapters in your life. You know, those are the that's like the crescendo at the end of the last chapter. Something really amazing happens that sticks with you. You know, like you don't remember every single word of the story that you just read, you know, when you read a book, but you remember those big moments that come at those climaxes, right? And that's all that is. That's almost dying. I think everyone would agree is a pretty big deal. Um,
Sure.
and the changes that are coming about directly from that or leading up to that tend to be ingrained in our memories. Like after going through cancer, I changed a lot about myself. That was a really defining moment. Even though I didn't get like near death, close to death, I mean, I guess I was pretty near death.
At, at times, yeah.
Yeah. um,
Yeah.
but you know, maybe I'm underplaying it a little bit, but
Yeah.
uh, I that's one of those pivotal moments where if somebody said explain your life to me in 5 minutes, that would probably come up, right? So
Well,
it stands to reason that would be life altering, right?
sure, but in a lot of these cases, it isn't the fact that the person almost died that they knew, oh, or I did die and I was resuscitated. It was the experience of the near death experience, this whole
Mm-hmm.
connecting with the force or whatever, and the vividness of the situation, the things that they were told, because a lot of times there's information relay, there's communication going on, the senses they had, those kinds of things are the things that deeply affect people. um and well, I guess you get the same thing, that occasionally there might be a dream that would do that, or certainly with
Yeah, I was just going to bring
certain.
that up. I was going to ask you, being that you've lost a parent, Have you ever had a dream where your mom has spoken to you since
Uh,
passing?
I a few times. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like part of a larger dream, I guess. It wasn't
Hmm.
necessarily the dream itself, but my dreams tend to be very complex and very well, we'll have to talk about that another time. But I here and there have been a couple times. Yeah.
Yeah, my friend Jeff that committed suicide 20 years ago, I still have dreams about him from time to time. Um, I think that's one of those things where someone that leaves an indelible mark in your consciousness will tend to crop up in dreams or dreamlike states, let's say,
Yeah.
and come back to you. And those are really moving moments for some people. Like I dated a girl who lost her father when she was in her 20s or so. That's pretty early to lose a dad, and she had quite a few dreams about uh, conversing with him and stuff. I mean, these are aspects that you really, really miss. And dreams are a great way to. I mean, we first episode of this season we did a lucid dreams episode, right? So
Yeah.
I think to some degree, basically, people are just autopilot lucid dreaming in these situations. That they're casting a character that they want to talk to, and maybe even to some degree they're hearing what they want that person to say. Maybe not, but
Yeah, and that would be really hard to differentiate those
yeah,
things. Like it'd be almost impossible to know for sure.
yeah. I mean, unless they said something that you totally don't want them to be like, like you're a total smeghead or something.
Yeah. Well, but the thing is, like, a lot of people can tell the difference between dreams and reality. And this is the thing that from my research into the subject, it seems a lot of people that have near death experiences consider it something like hyper reality. They're like, this was a real thing. This was not a hallucination. This was not a dream. It was so real. Um, and not all the situations involve like a loved one coming back. Sometimes it's somebody they don't know. Um, and
Ultimately, it would be great if we could talk to somebody, like interview them
yeah,
about their experience, because you know, not having gone through it myself, I don't know what it's like. But if someone were to explain to me you know how they know it's not a dream, like, because the thing about dreams is we don't really remember hardly anything about them. We tend to fill in the gaps. When we go back and think about the dream, we fill in the gaps with things that make sense. We try to make sense of it by plugging in pieces that make a coherent picture.
well, as a lucid dreamer, I don't do that. But yeah, a lot of people.
well,
Um,
well, you're just doing it in the moment, is what you're doing.
so you say. um, but there's definitely a certain feel to dreams, and there's a certain feel to hallucination. Like, that it's there's a sense that something is kind of off. Um, and I mean, I'm speaking from my own experience, so I don't know if everybody else shares that. So I guess, it's like I can easily tell the difference between reality, hallucination, and dreaming. Um,
Yeah.
but I think I do agree that talking to somebody who's had this experience would be invaluable,
Yeah.
maybe quite a few somebodies actually, because I think based on what I've looked at, the
Memory is
experiences
so
do vary.
memory's so fickle, though. It's like we when we're hallucinating, like the hallucinations that I've had, um, in retrospect, I feel like I knew it was happening. But if I remember back to that moment, I had no clue. You know,
Yeah.
I had a hallucination on marijuana that I thought I was in the hospital dying of cancer again, and
Mhm.
and that was very real. Like to the point that I felt like I was on chemo to the point of vomiting,
Hmm.
and that's powerful.
Oh yeah.
You know, when I was in the hospital actually with cancer, and I had that scopolamine patch on for too long, I heard voices that were very real, um, and they frightened me. I didn't know that they were fake. I
Well,
saw the closet like rattling with a weird light inside of it,
mhm.
and I was like, what the fuck's going on? You know, like I had to get out of there. It was fight or flight. It was very real.
Well, that's true, and um, maybe some of this is like you've actually experienced these things before, so reliving them, I guess, would be kind of like a flashbacks, like flashbacks to Nam or something like that. Like you're just reliving something that actually happened to you in the past. Um, but what about things that have never happened to you ever?
Well, my
Um,
mucus trying to kill me, that was a new one.
yeah, that is a weird one. I mean, I think this, to me, I see this as something that deserves exploration. It's really, really interesting.
Mhm.
Um, as a little bit of a psychonaut, I tend to be intrigued by these kinds of experiences, and
Psychonaut. Are you psycho or are you not?
no, no. Somebody well, you can Google it. Let me Google that for you. I, I I'm intrigued by these kinds of things, and I think it should be explored, because I think maybe, perhaps, we might find something out there, like another dimension or another reality, or find that there is no such thing as reality. Um, if we look hard enough and study hard enough, like using science, the scientific method, we could figure that out. Um, and even if we don't know all the answers, I think the journey to discovering, like uncovering those answers, um, yields so much information about ourselves, and could have far-reaching benefits for all kinds of things, psychology and therapy and things like that. Like understanding how the human mind works. Um, I- it to I think it's a big deal, and if we happen to realize there's a God, holy shit, how big would that be? Um, although I sorry to break it to everybody, I'm pretty sure if there is a God, God doesn't look anything like what the religions say God looks like or is. Um, just my theory. Um,
I'm reminded of a Rowan Atkinson stand-up skit. Um, if you've ever seen those, they're pretty hilarious.
oh, all of them, yes.
Yeah, and he was the like a demon doing like the onboarding process in
Oh yeah,
hell.
he was playing the devil. Yeah,
Yeah,
the devil, like
yeah,
welcoming you to hell.
yeah. And at one point he was like, Christians, would you stand up? Yes, I'm afraid the Jews were right.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, that would be some shit if we discovered God was real, and then we'd have to tell like a good chunk of the earth we're wrong,
Yep.
myself included.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I think it's really important to look into this because we still haven't really scientifically answered the question of what is consciousness? What is self-awareness? Like, what does it mean to be alive and be self-aware? Like, and I think about all those times where you're just sitting there looking up at the stars and thinking about your place in the universe and realize how small you are and it scares you to death. Or you think about how that thing, that organ in your skull is you. Um,
Oh, we
man,
should do an episode on what, like the concept of I. Like,
that's a good idea. Yeah. Uh,
that's a deep metaphysical, philosophical thing. That's like, has anyone really stopped to ever think of that?
yeah, we should do that. And but this whole idea of like, what is consciousness? What is that? You can't put that into words. You can't quantify it. It's like it's an incalculable thing. But yet it. Like, it's one of those weird things where you feel it. You can absolutely know what it is, but you can't define it. I think there was a Star Trek episode about that where was it Geordi talking to Data about anger or hate or something like that, trying to explain it, and
Something
he
like
was
that. Yeah.
asking like, what is that? And
He's like,
he
well, you
kept,
just know.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just know.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a worthwhile expedition into the further reaches of human existence to try to figure that out.
Yeah.
We may never find the answer, but again, the journey along the way might yield things like answers to questions we never asked. Um, and to me, it's worth it.
Mhm.
So, uh, well, I was going to talk about out of body experiences, um, but I think, well, we could probably go into that a little bit, because that's a component where people feel like they're leaving their body and floating. But I'm looking into the near-death experiences. There's been multiple situations, some kind of very interesting, where somebody saw something that they could only see if they were not in their body. Um,
Huh. So,
and
so that's like transcendental meditation, right? That's where
uh,
people basically consciously try to disconnect from their corporeal existence
yeah,
and
kind of like remote viewing and stuff like that too. Um, and and that seems to be a common component of these near-death experiences, where people say, "Oh, I was floating above my own body while the surgeons were operating on me,"
uh,
um, and they can describe things in very detailed ways. Um, there was, oh God, I wish I had written it down, but there was a lady that talked about a shoe that she saw like a couple stories up in the hospital and described it in perfect detail, and staff of that place went up and checked, and yeah, sure as shit, there was a shoe there and it looked
huh.
exactly like she described it. And they're like, how is
Wow.
that possible?
Hmm. That is interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, I remember you talking about a study where they like wrote something on a piece of paper and stuck it up in the ceiling or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then after somebody died, they were like, "Can you tell us if you saw any words or something?" And they would be able to recite whatever was written or something.
Yeah. I looked for that and I haven't been able to find it. I mean, it's been like 20 years since I read that, so going back and trying to find it is
That's
difficult. But
that's difficult to explain for sure.
yeah, and And that's the thing. It's like, I don't know that I would personally say, oh, it's God. Like,
Yeah.
just, there's a blank, insert God. Not necessarily, but there's something interesting
Yeah.
that we should explore. Um, Maybe not to the level of the movie Flatliners.
I
Let's
mean,
not go that
you
far.
you never know where this stuff comes from. It could have been. Did you say that was a lady that described the shoe?
Yeah.
Could have been. I don't know. Like, I'm just spitballing here, but maybe as she was being wheeled into the ER, she saw somebody else in the ER fixated on their shoe, and in passing heard, "We're moving this person up to floor 7" or whatever. And then later on, she heard one of the doctors say, "All right, we need to get her up to floor 2" or whatever. And then she's on floor 2 and she dies. And then sticks in her head that person with this shoe that she was fixated on was on floor 7. And then she just imagines that she's there on floor 7 looking at that shoe again. It could be something like
okay,
that.
that's a good point.
It's a stretch.
However, she described where it was located. I think it was sitting on the windowsill, and she described how the shoelace was attached to the shoe, like going around the back, sitting under the heel. So that does add a little layer of mystery there. And yeah, I don't know. It's just like, to me, I look at this stuff and I'm like, yeah, we should investigate this. It's worthwhile. There could be something there, and I think it does all of us a disservice as humans to discount it and say, well, that's a bunch of woo, we shouldn't even bother. No, I think we should, because there's enough questions raised to warrant exploration. Like real hardcore exploration where we really dedicate ourselves to trying to come up with some information. And so far, I think most of these kinds of studies have been self-funded, people with very limited resources. Like, there's no major studies that I know of, but it's an interesting thing. And yeah, I'd like to talk to somebody that's had one of these experiences, because I've had experiences, but I haven't almost died and had an experience. So I'd like to hear firsthand, like not somebody that knows somebody who died, but I'd like to talk to somebody who did die and had some kind of profound experience and what it was like, what happened. Yeah.
That would be cool. So I guess that's probably a good spot to wrap up on, huh?
Yeah, I think so. Well, we'll throw a couple links in the description, kind of starting points, because there was a long article that I read today in the Atlantic talking about this, like somebody that kind of looked into the subject of near-death experiences, and it's pretty interesting and fairly neutral. Like, I think if we provide any information, it should be neutral, inconclusive, let's say. And there's actually a site that collects lots of this information too, so we can throw that in, just for those who want to explore. I wanted to get into the idea of, like, what is a soul and does it exist, but I think maybe that's too big for the end of this. We're an hour in now, almost.
Yeah, that's an episode.
Yeah.
So if you know anyone, send them our way. Definitely hang out for the song at the end, because you love our songs, right?
Yeah, we got like something new and good. Yeah, as usual.
Newish.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Okay. Yeah. New to people out there. Something you've never heard before. Yeah.
So, thanks for deep sync diving with us into the near-death experience.
And